want to introduce you to a resource today. This is Gary Schnittjer, I guess is how you pronounce his name, um, book by book guide to the Old Testament use of the Old Testament. A very well written book, and you can see it's a very thick book. And Schnittjer goes through all the books of the Old Testament, and he shows where those books are used in other places. Even includes area for the New Testament use. In the back of Schnittjer's book, he has some very helpful drawings, places, well, here, places where the Lord chooses for his name. And you can see the main text and then all the subsequent text related to that. And these are very good. He has a section on the New Covenant, on the king coming from Judah. Got an excellent one on the Davidic covenant. Wonderful one on collective confession. Wonderful drawing on the Canaanite curse. Well, I wondered when we were looking at the Garden of Eden if it might be helpful to have a similar resource. And so they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. I should have done this earlier, but we'll see if this will work. Learning how to do kind of a book cam with this iPhone. You can see if you come to Scripture and do all the passages that are related to the Garden of Eden, you have the initial description in Genesis 2:10, and if you just put on a piece of paper everywhere you had a discussion of the Garden of Eden, well, clearly the clearest connection is going to be at the end of the Bible. So you have a description of Eden at the beginning of the Bible, and then you have this description of Eden at the end of the Bible. And many people who are saying, oh, the Bible doesn't say where the Garden of Eden is. Well, I've never seen anyone who would say that about this text that would try to argue that for this text. And clearly this text is related to Jerusalem. So the question is, do we have the land lost? Is there any connection with, at the end of the Bible with God giving back the land? And if you say there is a connection here, well, how do the details here describe the details here? Is it a different land, or is it a restoration to the same land? When you come to a whole Bible biblical theology, some things to think about is when we have Abraham, God coming to Abraham and says, leave your own land, your father's house, go to the land I will show you, Lake Lekah. I should have quotation marks there. The question is, does this promise relate to this lost land? And if you're saying, well, Eden is unconnected, well, is God giving a different land, or is he giving the same land? And it is interesting that if you make this connection, and John Sailhammer has pointed this out, that the borders of the promised land in terms of the rivers are the exact same, at least two of them, perhaps even three, as the Garden of Eden. Notice in the beginning and end, you've got the river of life and the river of life. You've got the tree of life and you've got the tree of life. Clearly, this is New Jerusalem being restored to earth. You have cherubs. You have cherubs in original Eden. So the connection here, just in terms of biblical theology, would make me wonder if there's a connection here as well. And notice that Jerusalem, it's not just the end of the Bible that has this connection, but there are plenty of places in the Old Testament itself that would affirm the New Testament exegesis of connecting this eschatological river with Jerusalem. That's done in Ezekiel. It's done by David in Psalm 46. It's done in Joel 3:18 in the English. It's 4:18 in the Hebrew. And then in Zechariah 13:1 and I think it's 14:8, it may be 14:9, but all of these are connecting this river. And so if God is saying the land I will show you, and we're kind of working through this Schnittjer-Like network, wouldn't it make sense that all of these passages are somehow connected together? And when you come to a text, the text means what the original author meant it to mean. And of course, tied up with that question is who you think the original writer was. If you think it's some kind of editorial work, then you're going to exegete the proposed sources. If you think it's Moses, you might ask what Moses understood. But ultimately, if you approach the scriptures with faith, the ultimate author of scripture is God. And did God include these details to be unrelated to the other passages in scripture? And what if, I appreciate a colleague at Bryan College who gave me this terminology, but what if God has created a enigma, but a solvable enigma, an initial enigma that the whole Bible is seeking to solve, where how do you locate this one garden with one river that splits into four? Well, couldn't you make the argument that the whole story is the way back to the Garden of Eden, to the land I will show you is actually the way back to this garden where people live with a holy God. And how do you get there? Well, it isn't just a place on a map, but it's Ezekiel 36. God has to give you a new heart and cleanse you from all your filthinesses and all your idols. That's what he's doing for all of us. What if the whole purpose of Moses writing what seems to be an irreconcilable dilemma is not to associate it with, Turkey or the Gulf of Kuwait, but rather to associate it with the whole journey that God will take Abraham through to the land I will show you. And ultimately, it's a land that will include the sacrifice of a beloved son. That's why you have the Lake Lakah in 12, 1-3, and then you have it again in 22:2. So I would argue that Eden can be located, and it's not in the places. Often people will respond and say, oh, it's in the Philippines or America or the Seychelles or, the blue and white Nile. Well, none of those passages give you a connection like our Schnittjer drawing. And just to be fair, this is a Schnittjer-like drawing. Schnittjer does not have this drawing. This is my drawing, but it's in thanksgiving for this wonderful work, the Old Testament, use of the Old Testament. Fantastic work. Love to hear your interaction, and as always, I'll see you next time.